So what I thought I would do is put together a couple of different resources on tips and tricks to level 3 essay writing. These are just based on predominantly observations or experiences that I've had, not just from teaching level 3, but through marking NCA exams. So I've had the absolute treat of marking them for the first time last year, which meant I marked well over 600, more like 680, I think, NCA level 3 3.1 essays. So the 3.1 and 3.2 criteria is near identical, except for a couple of words that obviously link it more to film. So they're very similar, and I thought I would share some things that I've learned from going through them. So start from the start, the statements. You've really got to read through them carefully. Make sure you read them all first. The best steps is to go through, cross out the ones that you know definitely don't apply to you, and then work from there. Process of elimination is best. Internally, you need to be able to get really good at quick plans and quick evaluations of statements. When you've gone through that, an easy way to prep for that rather is that there's effectively the same sort of aspects every year. The wording is going to change, but because you can argue the wording and you can argue the points, you need to just know what's going to come up. So often there will be it's the same as you've had every year of NCA. There's probably going to be a setting question, a relationship or conflict question, a character question, at least one language question, because so many people do short stories and poems now. So you can expect those same aspects. So as long as the same thing, you're aware of them, that's all that matters. Because if the question doesn't quite fit with your understanding of the character, so for example, your character isn't heroic, or your setting isn't an other world, it is your world, that's fine, because you can argue against that statement. So just be aware that those aspects will come up and search for the ones that do. When you have found the aspects that you're maybe more prepared for, actually read that statement really carefully and make sure you know what the words mean. So this year, 2019, they did put a clarification of what one of the phrases meant, status quo, but it's important that you know what they mean so that you're arguing them effectively. Identify those keywords, highlight them, write them on the top of every page. They are essential to your success. Passing level 3 isn't hugely difficult, but forming an argument and then actually getting beyond that achieved is going to come down to you being really focused and convincing with your arguments. Those keywords are essential. And that moves on to the next step. Figure out your argument early on. Easiest way that I do that is I do a little, like a T shape, agree, disagree, look at both sides of the argument, figure out where I'm coming from, and formulate it. And I'll look at that when we look at essay questions, which will probably be in another video. But the best way to do it is formulate that argument early on and write your thesis statement. Write it on the top of each page even. So write, agree because. Agree because worthwhile means. Figure out what you're going for, and keep focused on that. You're going to reference it in your introduction, but often people lose sight of that argument that they created at the beginning and get sort of hung up and waffling on and trying to throw everything they know about the text in. The best essays remain really tightly focused on a very clear argument. So take 5 minutes and come up with a very clear argument, and know it for sure, because 5, even 10 minutes wasted on arranging your argument is going to prove much more worthwhile down the track. Much more. And pick your question that suits your knowledge of the text. Some questions you might look at and, your teacher will get the paper and they will go, that question was perfect for our text. And it might suit your text and it might be perfect for your text, but that doesn't mean that's the thing that's stuck with you. Okay, so everyone's going to find something in the text that they understand better. For me, I prefer character, relationship, conflict questions. I don't naturally lean to setting, I don't naturally lean to theme, and I definitely don't naturally lean to language questions. But you're going to find something that you know better. And ideally, you're prepared for at least 2 to 3 aspects kind of well. So you've got to go with what fits your knowledge of the text. That's what's going to produce a better response. Going, well, I know my text has a really clear dystopian setting, but you don't really understand it, you're not going to be able to answer as well. If you know about your character and you know why they're sympathetic or heroic or unheroic, that's going to work better. So go for what suits your knowledge rather than what you think suits the text. Hopefully those two align, but if they don't, stick with what you know, because it's always, always, always going to be better. Looking at introduction. So by level 3, please, you would hope that you have avoided the cliched in the in the short story, Her First Ball by Catherine Mansfield, it's level 3. It's time to step it up. You're not going to get failed by that, but as I said before, I marked 680 essays, and that was because there's a poor level 3 turnout. I was meant to be marking 840 of them. So if I got through 840 essays and, avoiding the void, probably still had like 600 and 700 papers, and I came across that starter, it doesn't set the best tone. All right, you really want to be capturing that attention and making sure that the marker's going, oh, this stands out. I'm looking at that merit criteria straight away rather than, all right, achieved essay, let's see if we can go up from there. The idea is that you're meant to start from excellence and work your way down. So if I look at that as the first sentence, I'm automatically going, well, not excellence, maybe merit if they can pull up a good argument later on in this paragraph. So you want to hook them with an excellent starter and give them a reason to find that. A quote is a nice start. There's nothing wrong with a quote, either from the text or someone famous that links. I don't like just plonking a text. I don't like reading it where they've just plonked a text quote in there. You need to explain or link it. So as is said by Abraham Lincoln, blah, 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 and this is so true when looking at the novel, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you really need to link them. Otherwise, it's just there and it kind of doesn't do a lot. A quote from the text works just as well. A bit of a fact or commentary is good. So historical context can work with that. Or it is a truth. It is a well-acknowledged truth in society that people who are blah, blah, blah. Something like that's fine. You could comment on your author or poet. It is well acknowledged that Catherine Mansfield was revolutionary for her time. This was seen in her blah, blah, blah. The statement itself is fine. You can start with the statement, or you can twist that into a sentence. So some scholars may think that the most engaging texts come from a heroic character. Ultimately, then you go into agree or disagree. So the statement's fine. You can just start with a blanket statement, a blanket sort of argument. I agree with the statement, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to hook attention, but it does do this next step, which is crucial. It makes your argument super clear. So you really need to outline what your argument is. And at the bare minimum, you need to state whether you agree or disagree. So what I mean by outlining your argument is sort of if a text had a word like engaging or worthwhile, you've clarified what that means and why it is. So you might say, I agree with the statement that the most engaging texts have a character who overcomes difficulties. That's stating your point. Outlining an argument is because in this text, character A is hugely engaging as they emotionally connect with the audience. So you've clarified and defined what that engaging word means and what that qualitative word means. So that's what outlining the argument means. It also means giving some clear indication of where you're going with it. That's what outlining your argument means. And hopefully in another video, I'll be able to give you some examples of an outlined argument. Regardless, make sure you state whether you agree or disagree, or if you've got a bit of both, which is actually quite good, you say, by and large, I agree with the statement as seen in point A, point B. However, it is worth acknowledging that there are limitations to this argument, and I will discuss that in point C, something to that effect. This is your first opportunity to set the tone for your writing, set the tone for your essay. Okay, we often whiz through introductions in junior school because we just want you to get the basics down. But by level 3, it's an opportunity to have flair, particularly if you are only doing 2 out of the 3 papers, for example. You've got an hour and a half, so make it good. Even if you don't, you should be able to get your essays down to 5 pages. And 5 pages and about 50 minutes, if you're given 10 minutes for planning, is so doable. You've just got to practice, and you've got to practice under timed conditions. So practice writing good introductions. Practice find a quote that you think is great and you could link to a range of topics. Find a quote from your play. And if you're doing Shakespeare, find a quote from your play. It works so well. Body paragraphs. So you've done your whiz-bang introduction, and now you've actually got to give the meat to your essay. Use the keywords repeatedly. Keep coming back to your argument or thesis that you set up. And if you put that at the top of your page, it helps. It helps you keep focused. I've seen so many essays, even some that are actually beautifully written. I had an essay that I looked at and I thought, wow, that's amazingly written, M5. Got it moderated, and she said, sorry, it doesn't have enough link imagery. It's an N2. Beautifully written essay, but not enough link to the question. So it happens. It definitely happens. And that would have been devastating for that person to have got that back and been like, oh, M5, N2. So important, put them at the top of your page if you need to. That's the easiest thing that you can do, and it has the greatest success. The best essays are littered with evidence, specific evidence. That's the key thing to take away from this. It's often that we get lazy and we go, well, I know the event that shows it really well, but that's lazy. And what you want are quotes, lots and lots of quotes. So you actually, if you want to do well, you're going to need to know quotes. Accurate quotes work best, because if you are going to put a quote in and then analyze the language, if you've made up the quote, you're not going to be able to analyze the language as convincingly, because you wouldn't have prepped it, and you probably won't get it right, and you probably won't get the language features right because you made them up. So if you're looking at just achieving, you might have less accurate quotes, and it happens. You sometimes can't remember the word and you fudge it, but the best results come from people that know their evidence, they know their text really well, and they're able to show that with a range of evidence. So engagement with the text is essential. The more you have read the text, the better things will be. So the more you have read the text, you've highlighted key parts of the text, you've written those down again, you've written notes about them, you've written flashcards about them, and you've got them in your head, the better. I cannot reinforce enough that reading your text once and relying on only what's been done in class is never going to be as successful. Those students never do as well. So analyze the language, links in with this. If you have specific quotes, you have more to work with. So obviously in film essays, that's going to be film techniques, and that means a range of film techniques. So you have to reference not just dialogue, you have to go further. If you are doing a text that is written text, you need evidence, and what you want to do is analyze language or analyze events, analyze links, analyze development, but analyze language. Even if your question is not language focused, it is always going to help you. And that's where people that do short stories and poems do well. And that is where people that do Shakespeare do well, because even if you are not analyzing language specifically in your question, you have the room for analysis, and that's why they work really well. In saying that, I read a fantastic Margaret Atwood essay, The Handmaid's Tale, aka probably the most popular level 3 text that I marked. But they analysed the use of language associated with names really well and linked that to their argument. And that, I think they got an M6, purely just from that analysis, because it produced a far more convincing argument. And they've produced a full nearly page paragraph which looked at analysis of language and names, and then how that linked to inequality in the text. So do it. Give it a whirl. Give it practice. Link to theories of relevance. So by theories, there are a range of theories, and some teachers teach them and some teachers don't. And it's up to you to go a little bit further if your teacher maybe hasn't taught them as explicitly. Things like Marxist theory have come up. They've got to be relevant. Sigmund Freud's theories, you should give a little bit of a brief kind of summary of it before you launch into it. But theories, they're good. They do help lift a grade if they're used well. You can't just tick box throw them in and say Freud says this and not actually elaborate any further. And they've got to be relevant, but they can help. They're really good for those borderlines. So if you're on an A4, M5, or an M6, E7, they definitely will help you into those next grades up. Link to the wider world if relevant. I obviously, as I said, marked a lot of Handmaid's Tales essays, which is totally cool. Love the text, one of my favorite texts to read ever. Didn't enjoy marking the essays as much, but just because there's wider world links, just because you can make them, doesn't mean it's going to add to your argument. So ultimately, when you're saying links to family planning or Donald Trump or whatever, the best thing is then to bring that back into a commentary on human condition or society or what you can learn from that. It's not enough to say this is just like what is happening in the real world. You've then got to say this shows us that, and link it back. If you don't link it back, it's pointless. It's adding an extra 3 sentences, 2 sentences to your work, but it's not adding anything to your grade. Provide your reflections. You are in a unique situation where you are reading a text as a young, modern teenager. You can bring your personal experience into this. You can comment on it. You can say, if you've got enough sort of, not to get too PC, privilege that you haven't experienced some of the hardships in your text, acknowledge that. Reflect on what that means. Reflect on how that has influenced your interpretation. You might say that initially you judge this character, however, upon reflecting on your privilege, you realize. And that is going to straight away produce a more meaningful engagement. It's going to produce a more meaningful and convincing argument. So always provide your reflections. Personal engagement, you would not believe how highly that's valued by NCA markers. Link to the wider text. This is significant when we consider. This is significant when we consider earlier in the text, later in the text, the following scene, the other character. That shows your awareness of the wider text. That shows your awareness of author's craft, because one event linked into another. It shows development, comparison, contrast. It's a winner-winner chicken dinner. This is a difference between an A4 and an M5 essay nearly every time. So definitely look for it. And be focused. So this isn't an opportunity to just include everything you know about the text. Be focused, link to your argument, and sometimes that's easiest to do if you do have a scene that you anchor or an event that you anchor every paragraph around. That doesn't mean that you sort of only want to stick to that, and as I said, reference wider events, but that can be easier to give you a more focused approach. So keep that in mind. And finally, conclusions. So stop thinking of it as just a simple summary and a waste of space and something you've just got to do. And trust me, you do got to do it. You are graded on your ability to formulate a cohesive response. It's the only NCA level that actually requires essay structure and is a key aspect of the marking criteria. So it is not a waste of space. Yes, you have to do it, but don't just think of it as a summary. Think of it as your last opportunity to convince the marker of your grade. If you are borderline on your grade, this can secure it. Your marker has to read all the way through their essay. All right. And if they are between grades, they are going to read all the way through in a very detailed manner. And so your conclusion, it can be one sentence in that conclusion that just tips it over the edge, makes them secure enough, and they're like, sweet, that's an M5. Actually, you know what? That one's good, E7. So definitely use those conclusions. I cannot stress that enough as a marker. If I'm switching between the two of them, I definitely take that conclusion into consideration. And your markers, yes, they are bored and they've marked so many papers and they're dying a little bit, and they are speed reading. They definitely are, but they take this job seriously. Okay, I cannot tell you that they are just going to whiz through and give it a grade. They do take this seriously. I look at those essays and I think about my students, and I think out of respect for my students, I would hope their marker is doing the same thing. They're English teachers. They do care. Teachers innately care. So they're going to read through the whole thing. And that conclusion is crucial to show your understanding. This is where you can put your reflections. This is where maybe some smart things that you thought were quite good, but then they just didn't gel with any of your paragraphs. That's the time to put it in. Offer your personal insight. What have you learned? reflect on the aspects that you've been discussing. So if you've been talking about character or setting or relationship, reflect on that at the end. You've written this essay, what has that taught you? Maybe nothing, but what could you pretend that it has taught you? So that's the best opportunity to do that, and it's super, super important to do that. So offer your insight, reflect on the author's purpose. What's a message or a note that you can leave with the marker? Maybe prompt them to consider something. Finish on a question. That's a goodie. That shows reflection. That shows engagement. That shows some form of argument. Absolutely do it. Yeah, conclusions. Definitely don't skim over them. So hopefully this video has been relevant. I know I've talked really, really quickly. It's just something I'm passionate about, and I mark so many of them that I want people to make sure they don't make the same mistakes as some of the essays that I have read. So watch through this video again and make some notes if need be, but hopefully that has assisted you. Adios.